On the afternoon of November 26, 2025, Mrs. Wang, a 68-year-old woman, was home alone in her apartment on the 20th floor of Wang Chong House, part of the Wang Fuk Court residential complex in Hong Kong. Around 2:45 p.m., while going about her daily routine, she suddenly heard a series of strange sounds coming from outside, crackling noises that sounded remarkably like firecrackers. She assumed it was just construction noise from the renovation project that had been ongoing throughout the building. So, Mrs. Wang didn't bother looking out the window to investigate, since her windows had been sealed shut for some time to block out the noise and dust from the construction site. After all, she had grown accustomed to hearing all sorts of work-related sounds drifting up from the lower floors and the scaffolding outside. At that very moment, a close friend of Mrs. Wang happened to be driving past the Tolo Harbor area nearby. From a distance, the friend was horrified to see thick columns of black smoke and fierce flames billowing up from the Wang Fuk Court complex where Mrs. Wang lived. Without hesitation, the friend grabbed her phone and immediately called Mrs. Wang, her voice frantic with worry. "The building is on fire! Get out now!" The urgent warning jolted Mrs. Wang into action. She rushed to the front door and threw it open, only to be instantly engulfed by a wave of thick, choking black smoke that poured in like a flood. The intense heat from the corridor outside hit her face with suffocating force, forcing her to stumble backward in panic. At the same time, outside the building, Mr. Wang, Mrs. Wang's husband, had just stepped out moments earlier to pick up a few necessities. As he made his way back home, he stopped dead in his tracks, stunned by the horrifying sight before him. The building where he and his wife lived was completely engulfed in a sea of flames. Bright red fire licked up the sides of the tower while massive clouds of black smoke billowed skyward, blotting out the blue sky above. Without a second thought, Mr. Wang sprinted toward the base of Wang Cheong House with every ounce of strength he had. There, amid the chaotic crowd of people fleeing in all directions, he was struck by a devastating realization. His wife was still trapped somewhere inside the burning building. At exactly 3 p.m. on November 26, 2025, as the fire began to rage out of control and spread with terrifying speed, a flood of panicked emergency calls poured into the 999 hotline. Standing in the middle of the frantic crowd, pushing and shoving to escape at the foot of the building, Mr. Wang screamed his wife's name over and over, his voice lost amid the chaos of shouting and crying all around him. With trembling hands, numb and stiff with fear, he desperately dialed her number again and again. All he had left was one last flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, some miracle would happen, and she would answer, telling him she was safe. But cruel reality crushed that hope. The only response from the other end of the line was the hollow, hopeless sound of static. His throat tightened as if someone were squeezing it shut, tears blurring his vision, while his hand gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Just minutes later, the wail of fire truck sirens echoed through the streets of Tai Po District. Bright red fire engines raced toward the scene at full speed, and the moment the first firefighters arrived, they immediately realized this was no ordinary fire. This was something they had never encountered in their daily work. The scene before them was overwhelming and almost unbelievable in its horror. Fierce flames were roaring up from the exterior of Wang Cheong House, making the building look like a massive torch blazing in the heart of the city. The fire raced upward at a terrifying pace along the bamboo scaffolding that wrapped around the entire perimeter of the building. And within moments, the entire facade of the high-rise had transformed into a towering pillar of red-hot fire, casting an intense and frightening glow. Waves of scorching heat radiated outward with brutal force. Making matters worse, the dry winds blowing through the area that afternoon had become an unwitting accomplice, helping the flames spread beyond all control with horrifying speed. Within just 10 short minutes of the first flames erupting, the fire that started at Wang Cheong House had already spread to at least 4 or 5 neighboring buildings within the same residential complex. The speed at which the flames traveled was almost beyond belief. By around 3:45 p.m., less than an hour after the fire began, 5 of the complex's 8 towers were completely engulfed in flames, and that terrifying number continued to climb, quickly reaching 7 affected buildings. The entire Wang Fuk court complex, once a peaceful home to thousands of families, had been transformed into a massive fortress of fire in the heart of Hong Kong. Towering columns of pitch-black smoke billowed hundreds of feet into the air, blocking out the blue sky and forming an ominous dark cloud over the entire area. Residents living as far as a third of a mile away could clearly smell the acrid stench of burning in the air. And when they looked up at the sky, they could easily see the column of black smoke rising from the stricken complex. At the scene, what was unfolding looked like something straight out of a disaster movie. A vision of hell made real. Clusters of nylon dust prevention netting wrapped around the scaffolding quickly caught fire, crackling and hissing with terrifying sounds before flaring bright and then melting, dropping from above like curtains of flame. The bamboo poles that made up the scaffolding, a traditional material widely used in Hong Kong's construction industry, ignited and snapped with sharp cracking sounds. Entire sections of the scaffolding structure collapsed one after another, each pulling down the next in a devastating domino effect. Observing how the flames clung to and consumed the entire facade of the buildings from the lowest floors all the way to the rooftops, fire investigation experts at the scene quickly concluded that this fire had originated from the scaffolding system on the outside of the buildings, not from inside the apartments, as was typical in most fires they had encountered before. By this point, the entire scene had descended into absolute chaos, filled with a cacophony of sounds blending together into a symphony of terror and despair. From the upper floors of the burning towers, the desperate cries for help from residents echoed down without pause, anguished screams begging for rescue mixed with the agonized wails of those trapped in their apartments with no way out. Interspersed with these cries was the constant shattering of glass as windows cracked and exploded under the intense heat, raining shards down below, along with the frightening popping sounds of construction materials and furniture inside the apartments as they were devoured by the flames. The situation grew even more dire as many residents living on the upper floors of the burning buildings found themselves completely unable to escape to safety below, because thick black smoke and raging fire had completely engulfed all the stairwells and emergency exit corridors. Faced with a fire that was spreading at a dizzying pace and had clearly exceeded all normal means of control, the incident commander on site made the decision to raise the fire alarm to level 3, the medium alert level in Hong Kong's fire incident classification system, while urgently requesting additional reinforcements from neighboring fire stations. However, despite all the firefighters' efforts, the relentless flames continued to spread at a horrifying rate from building to building. As the situation grew increasingly severe and spiraled further out of control, the Hong Kong Fire Services Department was forced to continuously escalate the emergency alert level. At exactly 3:34 p.m., less than half an hour after the first firefighters arrived on scene, the fire was officially upgraded to a level 4 alert. But the nightmare was far from over. As night began to fall and darkness gradually enveloped the city, the fire continued to rage with undiminished fury. At 6:22 p.m. that same evening, in an unprecedented decision, the Hong Kong government officially issued a level 5 fire alarm, the highest and most severe level in the entire fire incident classification system of the Special Administrative Region. In fact, the catastrophic fire at Wang Fuk Court went down in history as the first time ever that a residential complex in Hong Kong faced a fire disaster serious enough to warrant a level 5 alert. It was also only the second level 5 fire in the entire city since 1997, a figure that underscored the unprecedented severity of this disaster over nearly 3 decades. The Hong Kong government recognized this as an extraordinarily serious disaster and activated every interagency emergency response mechanism available. Firefighting forces were mobilized on an unprecedented scale to battle the blaze at Wang Fuk Court. By around 9 p.m. on November 26th, a total of 128 fire trucks, 57 ambulances, and 767 firefighters and rescue personnel had been deployed to the scene. Fire crews from multiple districts were called in as reinforcements to Tai Po. Ultimately, the total manpower mobilized reached 888 firefighters and rescue workers, nearly the maximum capacity of the Hong Kong Fire Services Department. Fire Commander Derek Armstrong Chan reported that firefighting forces had to be divided into 26 specialized rescue teams to simultaneously approach multiple burning buildings and search for trapped residents. They had to spray water to fight the flames from outside, while also donning oxygen masks to push into the lower floors and try to evacuate residents. The mission was extremely dangerous. Temperatures at the scene were scorching, and many lower floors were like furnaces, making it impossible for firefighters to penetrate deep inside. Chunks of metal, concrete, and burning scaffolding continued to rain down from above, directly threatening the lives of rescue crews below. By around 8:15 p.m., the situation had still not improved. The fire commander reported that conditions were rapidly deteriorating. The fire continued to spread, falling debris and embers were increasing, and the number of emergency calls from inside the buildings had spiked. By this time, the sun had completely set, and the darkness only added to the difficulties of the overnight rescue operation. In response, the fire department decided to deploy additional personnel and support equipment, focusing all efforts on rescuing trapped residents as quickly as possible. Caught in this terrifying ring of fire, thousands of Wangfuk Court residents panicked as they searched for a way to escape. Fire alarms should have sounded to warn everyone, but many witnesses reported that they never heard any alarm bells in the building that afternoon. Instead, many people only realized disaster was approaching when they smelled smoke or heard neighbors shouting warnings. Mr. Tong Ping Moon, 74 years old, who lived on the 10th floor of the first building to catch fire, recalled that at 2:51 p.m. he noticed the smell of smoke. Before he could understand what was happening, a firefighter was banging on his door with the news. Mr. Tong and his wife initially hesitated to leave, thinking that a fire outside surely couldn't reach their apartment. But just minutes later, black smoke began seeping through the gaps around their door, filling the air with a suffocating, acrid smell that left them gasping for breath. Only then did the elderly couple frantically call the emergency number. For the next 3 hours, they followed the dispatcher's instructions, barricading themselves in the bathroom and stuffing wet towels into every crack around the door to keep out the toxic smoke. It wasn't until 6 p.m., when they were nearly at the end of their strength, that firefighters finally broke through the wall to rescue them from their smoke-filled apartment. Outside the buildings, those who had narrowly escaped were still in shock. They stood in stunned silence, watching the ferocious flames devour the homes they had spent so many years working hard to build. The cruel irony was that the building had just begun its first major renovation in over 40 years of use, and now the fire had taken everything. Despite the dangers, rescue teams never stopped their efforts to reach the floors where people remained trapped. Throughout the night, countless heart-stopping rescues took place. Firefighters broke down door after door, guiding residents to safety. Around 10 p.m., a man in his 30s was carried on a rescuer's back down through smoke-filled stairwells from the 16th floor to safety. He had been trapped for hours in the emergency stairwell before being found. In the night lit bright by raging flames, the entire Taipo community came together to help the victims. Authorities quickly evacuated more than 1,000 residents from the danger zone to temporary shelters, opening community halls and schools in the area to take in displaced residents. Most Wangfuk Court residents found shelter for the night at these locations or with relatives and friends nearby. Social organizations and charitable groups quickly joined the relief effort. The Hong Kong Red Cross sent staff to temporary shelters to provide medical supplies, first aid, and psychological support hotlines for those suffering from trauma. Organizations like the Salvation Army and Hong Kong Youth Association opened their facilities to those needing shelter and offered free counseling services. The YMCA of Hong Kong even opened the Guo Chaosha Youth Village in Ma On Shan to provide 900 free beds for victims who had lost their homes. Many churches and religious institutions in the area also stayed open throughout the night to shelter displaced residents. Private businesses stepped up as well. The Regal Hotel Group announced it would provide free hotel rooms for victims' families, along with care packages containing essential personal items. A shopping center near the scene stayed open all night, offering water, dry food, and free phone charging stations to help people stay in contact with loved ones. McDonald's Hong Kong donated free meals to victims and sent 1,000 breakfast portions to temporary shelters on the morning of November 27th. Major telecommunications providers like CMHK and 3HK set up free mobile data hotspots, loaned out portable chargers, and extended store hours to help residents in the Tai Po area stay connected. Remarkably, people from all over Hong Kong spontaneously set up donation points for relief supplies like clothing, blankets, and toiletries, while creating online groups to help families report that they were safe and connect with missing loved ones. This spirit of solidarity and mutual support lit a spark of hope in the darkest of times, helping victims feel they were not alone in facing such overwhelming loss. For long-term assistance, even as the disaster was still unfolding, the Hong Kong government announced arrangements for temporary housing and transitional accommodation for all residents who lost their homes. The Housing Bureau reported that it had prepared more than 2,000 beds in transitional housing facilities and 1,400 apartments in temporary housing projects to accommodate victim families while waiting for Wong Fuk Court to be rebuilt and repaired. These units would be provided free of charge or at nominal cost to ensure that no one would be left homeless after the disaster. Additionally, Chief Executive John Lee announced the establishment of a special relief fund of 300 million Hong Kong dollars, approximately 38 million US dollars, to provide financial assistance to victims. Each affected household would receive an advance of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars, about 1,280 US dollars, in emergency cash assistance, with continued support for rebuilding their lives afterward. Lee also pledged that no disaster victim would be left behind in the reconstruction effort. Meanwhile, the fight against the fire continued throughout the night of November 26th and into the early morning hours of November 27th. Thanks to the relentless efforts of firefighters, by around 1:50 a.m., the fire department reported that the blaze had been initially brought under control. Major fires in 3 of the 7 burning buildings had been completely extinguished, while flames in the remaining 4 had weakened to scattered small fires. However, firefighting operations remained extremely difficult on the upper floors. At 5:45 a.m. on November 27th, firefighters finally managed to get hoses up to floors 5 through 18 of some buildings to continue dousing the flames, while search and rescue teams began pushing into floors 13 through 23 to look for trapped victims. But on the higher floors, temperatures were still too intense, and many structures continued to smolder, making it impossible for rescue crews to safely enter. They had to wait for further cooling. By 8 a.m. on November 27th, the fire was essentially under control, and the black smoke was gradually clearing. Deputy Fire Services Director Derek Armstrong Chan reported that, of the 8 buildings in Wong Fuk Court, 1 had been completely unaffected, 4 had their fires fully extinguished, and the remaining 3 were still being worked on, but only had small pockets of fire on the upper floors. In total, it took more than 24 hours of continuous firefighting for Hong Kong's firefighters to fully extinguish the Wong Fuk Court blaze. This was considered one of the largest and most complex firefighting operations in the history of the Hong Kong Fire Services Department. Given the complexity of the operation, the Wong Fuk Court fire disaster left behind a devastating human toll. Throughout the night of November 26th and into the early morning of November 27th, the death count continued to rise. At 1:57 a.m. on November 27th, authorities confirmed that 36 bodies had been recovered and 29 people were injured, with 7 in critical condition. Meanwhile, 279 people remained missing. By 8 a.m. on November 27th, the official death toll had risen to at least 44, including 9 who died at the scene before they could be taken to hospitals. The number of injured requiring hospitalization rose to 62, with 17 in critical condition, most suffering from respiratory burns caused by inhaling hot smoke. Seriously injured victims were transferred to intensive care units, while others with burns or carbon monoxide poisoning from enclosed spaces also received intensive treatment. But hundreds more on the missing persons list still could not be contacted, fueling the worst fears. Sure enough, as November 27th progressed and rescue teams were able to reach higher floors and search through the rubble, the death toll soared. By the evening of November 27th, authorities announced that at least 65 people had died in the disaster, with 70 injured. about 16 in critical condition, and more than 20 seriously hurt. By November 28th, the horrific fire had claimed 128 lives. This staggering loss of life made the Wang Fuk Court fire the deadliest blaze in Hong Kong in more than 65 years, since the Sham Shui Po tenement fire of 1962, which killed 40 people. A pall of grief descended over the Tai Po community. A temporary mortuary was set up at the scene to gather victims' bodies before they were transferred to the government mortuary at Fushan, where families waited to identify their loved ones. Many families kept vigil at support centers, anxiously awaiting news of their relatives with the faint hope that some miracle might occur. The Hong Kong fire services also suffered a painful loss in this battle. Ho Wai Ho, a 37-year-old firefighter stationed at the Kai Tin fire station, heroically gave his life while performing rescue duties. Ho was a 9-year veteran of the fire service, who had immediately volunteered to respond to the scene as soon as the fire was reported. While fighting the blaze inside one of the buildings, he lost contact with his teammates. About 30 minutes later, when his colleagues conducted an urgent search, they found him collapsed with severe burns on his face. Although he was brought outside, he had already stopped breathing, becoming the first Hong Kong firefighter to die in the line of duty since the 2008 fire disaster. Ho Wai Ho's sacrifice shocked and saddened the entire city. Making his death even more heartbreaking was the fact that he had planned to marry his girlfriend of nearly 10 years in December of this year. Now they would be separated forever by this terrible fire. The material damage caused by the fire was also immense. 7 32-story residential towers were largely destroyed on their exteriors. Hundreds of apartments from ground level to rooftop were either gutted by flames or severely damaged. According to preliminary estimates, nearly 2,000 apartments were affected, leaving approximately 5,000 residents without homes. Many housing units were rendered completely uninhabitable, and the structural integrity of the buildings required thorough inspection, as the extreme heat may have weakened the concrete and steel. This was truly an unprecedented residential disaster in Hong Kong, a city famous for its densely packed high-rise towers and cramped spaces. As soon as the fire was brought under control, Hong Kong police and fire investigators moved quickly to seal off the scene and begin investigating the cause. A scene examination center was established, comprising experts from the Fire Services Department, Criminal Investigation Division, Government Laboratory, and Forensic Pathology Department, to conduct examinations and collect evidence from the burned buildings. Initially, the incident was treated as an accident, but preliminary findings at the scene led authorities to suspect foul play, and the investigation was quickly shifted to a criminal inquiry. At a press conference held shortly after the disaster, Tang Ping-kung, Secretary for Security of Hong Kong, stood before hundreds of domestic and international reporters to make important statements about the horrific fire. Tang confirmed that the speed at which the flames spread at Wang Fuk Court was completely abnormal and markedly different from what was typically seen in ordinary fires that Hong Kong firefighters had dealt with before. According to information he shared with the press, during the firefighting efforts, crews had discovered numerous suspicious and alarming details related to fire safety measures at the construction site. Specifically, the protective netting around the scaffolding, the plastic sheeting used for dust protection, and the waterproof tarps used to wrap the entire scaffolding system around the buildings all showed signs of failing to meet the mandatory fire-resistant standards required under current Hong Kong law. Even more notably, when police conducted a thorough inspection of the only building in the complex that had escaped the fire's destruction, they were stunned to discover that all the windows in the elevator lobby areas on every floor had been completely sealed with foam insulation panels, ostensibly to keep construction dust from entering the building during renovation work. However, what those responsible for this work had apparently ignored or failed to recognize was that foam is an extremely flammable material that catches fire and spreads flames very quickly when exposed to high heat. Based on evidence collected at the scene, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion that these seemingly harmless foam panels, when exposed to the extreme temperatures from the fire outside, had quickly ignited and burned fiercely, acting as dangerous fire bridges that helped spread the flames at a dizzying pace from floor to floor, while also allowing the fire to rapidly spread to neighboring buildings in the complex. Beyond these findings, the investigation revealed numerous other serious violations of construction safety regulations. According to the clear and detailed regulations set forth in the Code of Practice for Bamboo Scaffolding Safety issued by the Hong Kong Labor Department, all netting and tarps installed on scaffolding systems at any construction site must be manufactured from materials with appropriate fire-resistant properties and must meet safety standards recognized by the relevant authorities. Yet the troubling reality at Wong Fuk Court showed clear signs that the contractor in charge of the renovation project had deliberately used scaffolding netting with no fire-resistant capability instead of code-compliant materials, with the apparent motive of cutting construction costs to maximize profits. Similarly, the contractor's decision to seal windows with flammable foam panels instead of choosing safer, more fire-resistant materials had inadvertently created deadly fire bridges, allowing flames to easily penetrate from the external scaffolding deep into each floor of the buildings, causing devastating destruction on a massive scale. Given all this evidence, Hong Kong authorities had ample grounds to believe that the individuals responsible for managing and operating the construction company in charge of the Wong Fuk Court renovation project had demonstrated serious negligence to an unacceptable degree in ensuring fire safety standards at the site. And it was precisely this gross negligence, this prioritizing of profit over human life, that directly led to the catastrophic outcome of a fire spreading completely out of control, destroying nearly the entire residential complex and causing massive casualties among hundreds of innocent residents living there. Based on these findings, Hong Kong police quickly opened a criminal investigation into the fire. Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, arrested 8 people connected to the renovation project at the fire-stricken Wong Fuk Court complex. The ICAC announced that 7 men and 1 woman, aged 40 to 63, were arrested on suspicion of corruption in connection with the 330 million Hong Kong dollars, approximately 42 million US dollars renovation project at Wong Fuk Court. Among those arrested, 2 were directors of a construction consulting company, and 2 were responsible for supervising the renovation work at the complex. The remaining 3 included a married couple, who were subcontractors supplying bamboo scaffolding, and an intermediary. ICAC officers obtained warrants to search 13 locations, including the consulting company's offices, subcontractor premises, and the residences of all 8 individuals. Documents related to the construction project and banking records were seized. All 8 remain in custody pending investigation. Hong Kong police had previously arrested 3 men aged 52 to 68 on suspicion of manslaughter, including 2 directors of the construction company and a consultant for the renovation project. These individuals were suspected of selecting unsafe renovation materials and conducting construction and inspections in a negligent manner. As of now, although the investigation continues to be conducted urgently and thoroughly, Hong Kong police have not yet officially released any detailed information about the specific cause of the fire. However, while awaiting official conclusions from authorities, public speculation has run rampant, with the most widely circulated theory being that the fire may have been sparked by careless smoking by construction workers. This theory gained traction because shortly after the fire broke out and news began spreading through the media, a video surfaced showing workers casually smoking cigarettes while working on the bamboo scaffolding around the building. Despite the fact that smoking is strictly prohibited at all construction sites throughout Hong Kong, especially at sites using flammable materials like bamboo and nylon netting. The situation was made worse by the fact that Wong Fuk Court was an older development, and the renovation project was using a very traditional construction method characteristic of Hong Kong's building industry: bamboo scaffolding. To understand the scale and history of this complex, it's important to know that Wong Fuk Court was built in the early 1980s, comprising 8 massive high-rise towers, each approximately 32 stories tall, with a total of 1,984 residential units. It was home to more than 4,600 residents of all ages and backgrounds. After more than 45 years of continuous use without any major renovations, it wasn't until 2024 that the building management finally decided to undertake a comprehensive maintenance and repair project across all buildings in the complex. Starting in July 2024, all 8 high-rise towers were progressively wrapped in dense bamboo scaffolding and distinctive green safety netting, all in service of renovating and refreshing the exterior facades of buildings that had deteriorated over the decades. In theory, the safety netting around the scaffolding was supposed to act as an effective protective barrier, preventing construction materials, tools, or debris from accidentally falling from above and endangering residents still living in the building as well as pedestrians on the street below. Along with the installation of scaffolding and protective netting, all windows in the apartments and common areas of the buildings were carefully sealed with thick foam insulation panels, ostensibly to prevent dust and noise from the construction work from entering residents' living spaces, allowing them to continue their daily lives without being too affected by the renovation work happening just outside their windows. But harsh reality proved that when the quality of materials used failed to meet necessary safety standards, the very things designed with the noble purpose of protecting and ensuring people's safety had ironically become contributors to the tragic disaster. Particularly serious was the nature of the bamboo scaffolding system. While bamboo has a long tradition in Hong Kong's construction industry and is valued for its flexibility and load-bearing capacity, it has one fatal flaw. Bamboo is extremely flammable and burns rapidly. Making matters worse, due to the particular construction method used, the bamboo scaffolding was erected right against the exterior of the buildings, with only a narrow gap between the scaffolding and the concrete walls, just enough space for workers to move around and do their jobs. This narrow gap inadvertently created the perfect physical structure for what fire experts call the chimney effect. According to this principle, when even a small fire ignites anywhere at the lower part of the scaffolding, hot air and smoke quickly rise through the narrow space between the scaffolding and building walls, drawing fresh air from below to replace it. This new airflow provides additional oxygen to the fire, causing it to burn more intensely and spread upward at a dizzying speed. On November 26th, the weather in the area was abnormally dry, with humidity at only about 40 to 50%. Prompting the Hong Kong Observatory to issue an extremely high wildfire risk warning. Alongside the police investigation, Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption also quickly became involved. Recognizing that the case involved serious public interest concerns, the commission established a special task force to conduct a comprehensive investigation into whether corruption had played a role in the Wong Fuk Court renovation project. A statement from the ICAC released on the afternoon of November 27th indicated that the agency suspected the 330 million Hong Kong dollar renovation project may have involved financial irregularities. The ICAC said it would focus on determining whether any officials or related parties had accepted bribes leading to the approval of substandard materials. This additional investigative track aimed to address the root causes of the disaster and prevent similar incidents in the future. The commission also extended its deepest condolences to the fire victims and affirmed its commitment to bringing to justice any individual or organization found to have engaged in wrongdoing related to this disaster. Thus, from the ashes of this tragedy, Hong Kong authorities uncovered a chain of serious violations. Negligence in construction and safety oversight had directly contributed to turning what might have been a small incident into a massive disaster that claimed many lives. The investigation continues, but the painful lesson is already clear. Fire safety is something that can never be taken lightly, especially when flammable materials are involved in densely populated high-rise buildings. And that is the shocking Hong Kong fire disaster that has captivated public attention in recent days. What are your thoughts on this tragedy? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.